The letter trembled in Adelaide Armstrong's hands as she stepped off the stagecoach into the dusty streets of Hot Springs, South Dakota, her heart hammering with a terror she could barely contain, because the words her late friend Sarah had whispered on her deathbed still echoed in her mind. "Whatever you do, Adelaide, don't marry Marcus Rutherford. He's not what he seems. There's something dark in him, something violent and cruel." The year was 1882, and Adelaide had traveled all the way from Philadelphia with nothing but a worn carpetbag, and the knowledge that she was about to marry a man her dying friend had warned her against. Sarah had been Marcus's first mail-order bride, and she had lasted only 3 months in Hot Springs before fleeing back east, broken and terrified. She had died 2 weeks later from pneumonia, but Adelaide suspected the illness had taken root in a spirit already shattered. Sarah's sister had begged Adelaide not to go, but what choice did she have? Her father's debts had consumed everything after his death, and her stepmother had made it clear there was no room for Adelaide in her new life with her new husband. So Adelaide had answered Marcus Rutherford's advertisement for a bride, not mentioning that she knew of Sarah, hoping desperately that her friend's warnings had been exaggerated by fear or misunderstanding. But as she stood in the afternoon sun of this frontier town, watching the dust devils dance down the main street, she felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders like a yoke. "Miss Armstrong." A deep voice broke through her thoughts, and Adelaide turned to face the man who would be her husband. Marcus Rutherford was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His face was weathered and scarred, a jagged line running from his left temple down to his jaw, and another cutting through his right eyebrow. His hands were massive, knuckles thick and misshapen as though they had been broken many times. He wore dark clothing that made him seem even more imposing, and his eyes, a pale gray that reminded Adelaide of winter ice, studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back onto the stagecoach and beg the driver to take her anywhere else. "Mr. Rutherford," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I imagine you're tired from your journey," he said, and Adelaide noticed he didn't smile, didn't offer any warmth in his greeting. "I've arranged for you to stay at the boarding house tonight. We'll marry tomorrow at the church, 10 o'clock. "Tomorrow?" Adelaide's stomach lurched. She had hoped for at least a few days to gather her courage. "No point in waiting," Marcus said flatly. He reached for her carpetbag, and Adelaide flinched involuntarily. She saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been hurt or anger. She couldn't tell which. He pulled his hand back. "I'll have someone bring your bag to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. It's the blue building at the end of the street." He turned and walked away without another word, his boots heavy on the wooden sidewalk, and Adelaide stood frozen, watching him go. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she had nowhere to run to. She had spent her last dollars on the train ticket west. "You must be the new bride," a cheerful voice said, and Adelaide turned to see a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. "I'm Dorothy Henderson. I run the boarding house where you'll be staying. Come along, dear. You look like you could use a cup of tea and a good meal." Adelaide followed Mrs. Henderson down the street, grateful for the woman's steady stream of chatter about the town, the weather, and the upcoming church social. It kept Adelaide from dwelling on the fear coiling in her chest. The boarding house was neat and welcoming, with lace curtains in the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson led Adelaide to a small but clean room on the second floor and promised to bring up supper within the hour. Alone in the room, Adelaide sank onto the bed and let the tears come. She cried for her father, for Sarah, for the life she had left behind, and for the uncertain future that awaited her. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin and tried to compose herself. She was not a child. She was 22 years old, and she had survived her father's death and her stepmother's cruelty. She would survive this too. But that night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town, Sarah's words haunted her dreams. She saw Marcus's scarred face, his cold eyes, his massive hands that could so easily hurt her, and she woke before dawn with her heart racing and her nightgown damp with sweat. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and warm, the kind of day that should have filled Adelaide with hope. Instead, she dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her mother's, and walked to the church with Mrs. Henderson beside her, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. The church was small, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray, and inside it smelled of beeswax and old hymnals. Marcus stood at the altar with the preacher, and Adelaide was surprised to see that he had changed into a clean shirt and had made an effort to tame his dark hair. He watched her walk down the aisle, and again, Adelaide could read nothing in his expression. The ceremony was brief. Adelaide's voice shook as she repeated her vows, and Marcus's voice was low and steady, giving away nothing of what he felt or thought. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Marcus did not kiss her. He simply nodded, thanked the preacher, and led Adelaide out of the church. "My ranch is about 5 miles north of town," Marcus said as he helped her into a wagon. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but Adelaide still tensed at the contact. "We'll be there by noon." They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the jingle of the harness. Adelaide studied the landscape, the rolling hills dotted with pine trees, the distant mountains still touched with snow even in early June. It was beautiful country, wilder and more open than anything she had known in Philadelphia, and under different circumstances, she might have found it exhilarating. Marcus's ranch appeared as they crested a hill. It was larger than Adelaide had expected, with a sturdy house built of logs, a barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and horses in one of the corrals. "I run about 200 head of cattle," Marcus said, breaking the long silence. "I also break and train horses. It's a good living." He helped her down from the wagon, and Adelaide noticed again how careful he was, how he released her immediately once her feet touched the ground. He led her to the house and opened the door, stepping back to let her enter first. The interior was surprisingly well maintained. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. Everything was clean and orderly, almost austere in its simplicity. "Your room is upstairs," Marcus said, and Adelaide's head snapped around to look at him. "I thought you'd want your own space. There are 2 bedrooms. You can take the one on the right." "I don't understand," Adelaide said carefully. Marcus's jaw tightened and he looked away from her. "I'm not going to force you into anything, Mrs. Rutherford. I know you're afraid of me. I saw it in your eyes yesterday. You flinched when I reached for your bag. So I'm telling you now, you have your own room, your own space. I won't come near you unless you want me to." Adelaide didn't know what to say. This was not what she had expected. "Why did you want a bride if you don't want a wife?" "I didn't say I don't want a wife," Marcus said, his voice rough. "I said I won't force you. There's a difference." He moved to the door. "I have work to do in the barn. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry. Make yourself at home." He left before Adelaide could respond, and she stood in the middle of the room, more confused than ever. This did not match the monster Sarah had described, but perhaps this was how it had started with Sarah too. Perhaps Marcus was simply biding his time. Adelaide spent the rest of the day exploring the house and putting away her few belongings. The bedroom Marcus had given her was pleasant, with a window overlooking the mountains and a comfortable bed covered with a quilt that had clearly been made by skilled hands. She wondered if Marcus's mother had made it, or perhaps a sister. She realized she knew almost nothing about the man she had married. As evening approached, Adelaide nerved herself to prepare dinner. She found venison in the cold cellar, along with potatoes, carrots, and onions. She made a stew, something simple but hearty, and had just set the table when she heard Marcus's footsteps on the porch. He paused in the doorway, looking surprised. "You didn't have to cook." "I'm your wife," Adelaide said, though the words still felt strange on her tongue. "Of course I'll cook." Marcus nodded and moved to wash his hands at the basin. He took off his hat and hung it by the door, and Adelaide noticed his hair was damp with sweat, his shirt dusty from the day's work. They sat down to eat in awkward silence. "The stew is good," Marcus said after a few minutes. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Adelaide replied. She gathered her courage. "Mr. Rutherford, I think we need to talk." He looked at her warily. "What about? About why I'm here. About what you expect from this marriage. About Sarah." The spoon froze halfway to Marcus's mouth, and his face went completely still. "What do you know about Sarah?" "She was my friend," Adelaide said quietly. "She died 2 weeks before I came here. On her deathbed she warned me about you. She said you were cruel and violent, that I should never marry you. But I had no choice. I have no family, no money, nowhere else to go, so I came anyway, knowing I might be marrying a monster." Marcus set down his spoon very carefully. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. "Sarah said that about me?" "Yes, and you believed her." "I don't know what to believe," Adelaide admitted. "You don't seem cruel. You've been nothing but courteous to me, but Sarah was terrified, Mr. Rutherford. Something happened here that broke her spirit." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the fireplace and braced his hands against the mantel, his back to Adelaide. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Sarah lasted exactly 3 weeks here," he said. "Do you know why she left? It wasn't because I hurt her. It was because she couldn't stand to look at me. She said my scars disgusted her, that I looked like a monster. She couldn't bear to be in the same room with me. She flinched every time I came near her, just like you did yesterday. She cried every night. I could hear her through the walls." Adelaide felt a chill run through her. She never said anything about that. Why would she? Marcus turned to face her, and Adelaide saw raw pain in his eyes. "It's easier to call me a monster than to admit she couldn't see past my face. I got these scars trying to save my parents from a barn fire when I was 15. I pulled my father out, but when I went back for my mother, the roof collapsed. She died and I lived, and I've carried these scars ever since. Some people can't look past them. Sarah was one of them." "I'm so sorry," Adelaide whispered. "About your parents, about Sarah. Are you?" Marcus's voice was bitter. "Or are you just sorry you're stuck here with a monster?" "I don't think you're a monster," Adelaide said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm afraid of what I don't know, Mr. Rutherford, but you've shown me nothing but kindness since I arrived. Sarah was wrong about you." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Maybe she was wrong about being cruel, but she wasn't wrong that I'm not an easy man to look at. My father told me that a person's character matters more than their appearance," Adelaide said. "I'm beginning to think he was right." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a slight softening around his eyes. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Adelaide said softly. "I miss him every day." Marcus nodded and returned to the table. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and when Adelaide cleared the dishes, Marcus helped her wash them without being asked. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about the man he was. Over the next few weeks, Adelaide settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She cooked and cleaned, tended a small vegetable garden Marcus helped her plant, and learned to make butter and cheese. Marcus worked long hours with the cattle and horses, but he always came in for the midday meal and supper, and gradually they began to talk more. Adelaide learned that Marcus had built the ranch himself after his parents died, that he had a gift for working with horses, and that he read extensively in the evenings, his small collection of books carefully preserved. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught Adelaide by surprise. Marcus learned that Adelaide had studied to be a teacher before her father's death, that she loved poetry and music, and that she had a stubborn streak that wouldn't let her give up even when things seemed hopeless. He found himself looking forward to meal times, to the sound of her voice as she read aloud in the evenings, to the way she hummed while she worked in the garden. One evening in late June, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The wind howled around the house, and rain pounded against the windows with such force that Adelaide worried the glass would break. She was in the kitchen trying to secure a shutter that had come loose when a tremendous crack of thunder made her jump. The shutter slipped from her hands and slammed against the outside wall. "Let me get it," Marcus said, appearing at her side. He reached past her to catch the shutter, and his arm brushed against hers. Adelaide didn't flinch. She realized with surprise that she had grown accustomed to his presence, that she no longer felt that instinctive fear when he came near. Marcus secured the shutter and turned to find Adelaide looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "I was just thinking that I'm not afraid of you anymore." Marcus went very still. "No, no," Adelaide said softly. "I think I'm beginning to understand who you really are, Marcus." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips made something tighten in Marcus's chest. "And who am I?" he asked quietly. "A good man," Adelaide said. "A gentle man despite what the world has done to you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. No one had called him gentle since before the fire, since before his face had been scarred. "Adelaide," he said, her name feeling precious in his mouth. "I need you to know something. These past weeks with you, having you here, it's been the best time I've had since I lost my parents. You've made this house feel like a home again. But I meant what I said on our wedding day. I won't push you for more than you're willing to give." Adelaide looked up at him, at the scars that she had once found frightening and now saw as marks of courage and sacrifice. "What if I'm willing to give more?" she asked. Marcus's breath caught. "Are you sure?" In answer, Adelaide reached up and touched his scarred cheek gently. Marcus closed his eyes at the contact, and Adelaide saw a single tear slip down his face. Her heart broke and mended at the same time, and she understood that this strong, gentle man had been starving for simple human affection. "I'm sure," she whispered. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her with such vulnerability, and hoped that Adelaide felt tears prick her own eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question rather than a demand, and Adelaide answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd have this," he said roughly. "I never thought anyone would want me." "I want you," Adelaide said. "Not despite who you are, but because of who you are." That night, Adelaide did not sleep in her own room. She slept in Marcus's arms, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt truly safe. Their marriage became real in every sense over the following weeks. Marcus courted Adelaide the way he should have from the beginning, picking wildflowers for her when he rode the range, teaching her to ride horseback, taking her on picnics by the creek that ran through his property. Adelaide bloomed under his attention, and Marcus discovered a capacity for joy he had thought the fire had burned out of him. In August, a neighboring rancher named Tom Blackwell started causing trouble. He had been trying to buy Marcus's land for years, and he wasn't pleased that Marcus now had a wife who might give him heirs to pass the property to. Blackwell began cutting Marcus's fences and driving off his cattle, and when Marcus confronted him, Blackwell made threats. "You're a fool, Rutherford," Blackwell sneered. "You think that pretty wife of yours is going to stay once she figures out what kind of man you really are. She'll run just like the last one did." Marcus felt rage boil up inside him, the old anger that he had worked so hard to control. His hands clenched into fists, and he took a step forward. Blackwell's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction, clearly hoping to provoke Marcus into throwing the first punch. "Marcus, don't." Adelaide's voice cut through the red haze of his anger. She had ridden out to find him when he hadn't come home for the midday meal, and she urged her horse between Marcus and Blackwell. "He's not worth it." "Listen to your wife, Rutherford," Blackwell taunted. "Let her fight your battles for you." Adelaide turned her cold gaze on Blackwell. "Mr. Blackwell, I suggest you leave my husband's property immediately. If you continue to trespass and vandalize our land, I will contact the territorial marshal. My father was a lawyer, and I am quite familiar with property law. I can make your life very difficult if you force me to." Blackwell's smirk faded. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Adelaide said icily. "I have documented every instance of fence cutting and cattle theft, complete with dates and witnesses. Sheriff Morrison is already aware of the situation. The marshal will be very interested in a pattern of intimidation and theft." Blackwell glared at her, then at Marcus. "This isn't over," he spat, but he wheeled his horse and rode away. Marcus looked at Adelaide with amazement and admiration. "You documented everything." "Of course I did," Adelaide said. "I told you my father was a lawyer. He taught me to always have evidence." She smiled at him. "And I've been keeping Sheriff Morrison informed just in case." Marcus pulled her off her horse and into his arms, kissing her soundly. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" he asked when he came up for air. Adelaide's eyes widened. It was the first time he had said those words. "You love me." "I love you," Marcus said firmly. "I think I started falling in love with you the first time you looked past my scars and saw me. I love your courage and your kindness and your stubborn determination. I love the way you hum when you cook and the way you read poetry aloud in the evenings. I love everything about you, Adelaide." Adelaide felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "I love you too," she said. "I love your gentleness and your strength. I love that you're patient and kind. I love the man you are, Marcus Rutherford, and I thank God every day that I found the courage to come here." They stood there in the summer sunshine, holding each other, and Marcus felt whole for the first time since the fire had scarred him. Adelaide had given him something more precious than he had ever imagined. She had given him love without conditions, acceptance without reservations. True to Adelaide's warning, the territorial marshal did pay a visit to Blackwell, and the harassment stopped. Blackwell kept his distance, and Marcus was able to focus on building up his ranch and his life with Adelaide. As autumn painted the hills gold and crimson, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening as they sat by the fire, and she watched his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes," Adelaide said, smiling through happy tears. "Are you pleased?" Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Pleased doesn't even begin to describe it," he said. "I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." Adelaide, you've given me everything I thought I'd lost. You've given me a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Adelaide suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons, and as winter set in, she found the cold and isolation of the ranch difficult to bear. But Marcus was endlessly patient and attentive. He held her when she was sick, made her tea when she couldn't sleep, and read to her for hours when the winter storms kept them housebound. In January, Dr. Williams came out from town to check on Adelaide. He was concerned that she was too thin, that the pregnancy was taking too much out of her. "She needs to eat more," the doctor told Marcus. "The baby is taking everything she has." "I'm trying," Adelaide said wearily. "Everything makes me feel sick." Marcus experimented with different foods, trying to find things Adelaide could keep down. He made delicate broths and soft cooked eggs, brought her apples from the cold cellar, and even rode into town to buy crackers and ginger candy from the general store. Slowly, Adelaide began to regain her strength. As her belly grew round with their child, Marcus found himself overwhelmed with protectiveness. He insisted Adelaide rest more, take on fewer chores, let him do the heavy work. Adelaide tolerated his fussing with amused patience, but she put her foot down when he suggested she spend the rest of the pregnancy in bed. "I am not an invalid," she told him firmly. "I am pregnant, not dying. I need to move and stay active. Dr. Williams said so." "I just want you to be safe," Marcus said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "Both of you." Adelaide softened and took his hands in hers. "We are safe, Marcus. You've made sure of that, but you have to let me live my life. Our child needs a mother who is strong and capable, not one who has been wrapped in cotton wool." Marcus sighed and pulled her close, resting his hand on the swell of her belly. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just so afraid something will happen to you." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Adelaide assured him. "I'm strong and I have you. We're going to be fine." As spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and the promise of new life, Adelaide's time drew near. Marcus became increasingly anxious, and Adelaide finally sent him into town to fetch Dr. Williams and Mrs. Henderson, who had agreed to help with the birth. "Go now," Adelaide said when the first pains began. "And don't rush back. First babies take a long time. I don't need you pacing and making me nervous." Marcus rode to town as though demons were chasing him, and returned with the doctor and Mrs. Henderson in record time. The hours that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. He waited downstairs, listening to Adelaide's cries of pain, feeling utterly helpless. When he couldn't stand it anymore, he went to the barn and worked, mucking out stalls and repairing tack, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on all the things that could go wrong. It was nearly dawn when Mrs. Henderson came to find him. "You have a son," she said, beaming. "A strong, healthy boy, and your wife is asking for you." Marcus ran to the house, taking the stairs two at a time. He burst into the bedroom to find Adelaide propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling with a tiny bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Marcus approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Adelaide pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. The baby's eyes were scrunched shut, and his little fists waved in the air. "He's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "He's perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Adelaide asked. Marcus looked at his large, scarred hands and shook his head. "I might hurt him." "You won't hurt him," Adelaide said firmly. "You're his father, Marcus. He needs you." Carefully, with Adelaide guiding him, Marcus took his son into his arms. The baby was so small, so light, and yet Marcus felt as though he held the entire world. He looked down at his child and felt tears streaming down his face. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. Marcus thought for a moment. I'd like to name him after your father if that's all right with you. Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. You do that. Your father raised an incredible daughter, Marcus said. I'd be honored to name our son after him. His name was Andrew, Adelaide said softly. Andrew James Armstrong. Andrew James Rutherford, Marcus said, testing the name. It's perfect. They named their son Andrew, but they called him Drew, and he became the center of their world. Marcus proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, and Adelaide watched with joy as the bond between father and son grew stronger every day. When Drew was 3 months old, Adelaide found herself pregnant again. She groaned when Dr. Williams confirmed it. Already. I've barely recovered from the first one. But Marcus was delighted, and this pregnancy was easier than the first. Adelaide sailed through it with barely a hint of morning sickness, and in December, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret Rose after Marcus's mother and called her Maggie. With 2 babies to care for, life on the ranch was chaotic and exhausting, but it was also filled with love and laughter. Marcus built onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He hired a ranch hand to help with the cattle so he could spend more time with his growing family. Adelaide taught Drew his letters as soon as he was old enough, reading to him every night before bed. Marcus carved wooden toys and taught his son to ride as soon as he could sit a horse. Maggie grew into a spirited little girl who followed her father everywhere, chattering constantly and insisting on helping with everything. When Drew was 5 and Maggie was 3, Adelaide gave birth to twin boys. They named them Samuel and Stephen, and the ranch house was filled with the sound of children's voices and running feet. Marcus, who had once lived in lonely isolation, now found himself surrounded by noise and mess and chaos, and he loved every minute of it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Adelaide leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked. Marcus looked at his wife, at the woman who had seen past his scars to the man beneath, who had given him love and a family and a life he had never dreamed possible. He looked at his children, healthy and happy and full of life. He looked at the ranch, thriving and prosperous, a legacy he could pass on to his sons and daughter. "I'm more than happy," he said, pulling Adelaide close. "I'm blessed. You took a chance on a scarred man who had given up on finding love. You gave me everything, Adelaide. You gave me hope and purpose and a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive." "You gave me those things too," Adelaide said softly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in Hot Springs, I thought I was walking toward my doom. Instead, I found my home. I found you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Drew came running up to the porch, breathless with excitement. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow?" he asked. "Samuel and Stephen want to come too." "I don't see why not," Marcus said, ruffling his son's hair. "If your mother can spare us for a few hours." "I think I can manage," Adelaide said with a smile. "Maggie and I will have a ladies' day." "Can we make cookies?" Maggie piped up, abandoning the wildflowers she had been gathering. "We can make whatever you like," Adelaide promised. As the children ran back to their games, Adelaide thought about how far they had come from that terrifying day when she had arrived in Hot Springs expecting to meet a monster. She had found instead a man of deep gentleness and strength, someone who had known pain and loss, but had not let it harden his heart. The years passed in a blur of busy days and quiet evenings. Drew grew tall and strong, taking after his father in both appearance and temperament. He had inherited Marcus's gift with horses and his patience. Maggie became a beautiful young woman with Adelaide's love of learning and her father's stubborn determination. The twins were inseparable, full of mischief and energy, keeping their parents on their toes. When Drew was 15, Tom Blackwell died, and his widow decided to sell the ranch. Marcus bought it, combining the two properties into one of the largest spreads in the territory. The Rutherford Ranch became known throughout South Dakota for its quality horses and cattle, and Marcus's reputation as a fair and honest man spread far beyond Hot Springs. Adelaide became involved in the community, helping to establish a school in Hot Springs and serving as a teacher when they couldn't find anyone else. She taught reading and writing to children whose parents had little education themselves, and she made sure that every child in the area had access to books, even if it meant ordering them herself from back east. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Adelaide back to the spot where they had first kissed during the thunderstorm. The house had been expanded several times since then, but Marcus had preserved that original room, keeping it as a reminder of where their love had begun. "Do you remember that night?" Marcus asked, holding Adelaide's hand as they stood by the window. "I remember being terrified of the storm," Adelaide said with a smile, "and more terrified of my feelings for you." "Why were you terrified of your feelings?" "Because I was falling in love with you and I didn't know if I could trust it," Adelaide admitted. "Sarah had been so afraid. I worried that I was making a terrible mistake." "And now?" Marcus asked. Adelaide turned to face him, cupping his scarred cheek in her hand. "Now I know that coming here, marrying you, was the best decision I ever made. These 20 years with you have been the happiest of my life, Marcus. You've been everything I never knew I needed." Marcus kissed her palm. "I was ready to give up on life before you came. I had resigned myself to being alone, to being the monster people saw when they looked at my face. You taught me that I was still worthy of love, still capable of building something beautiful." They held each other as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together through love and determination and faith. As Adelaide grew older, she wrote down her story, wanting her children and grandchildren to know how she and Marcus had found each other. She wrote about her fear and Marcus's gentleness, about the prejudice he had faced, because of his scars and the courage it had taken for both of them to look past fear and see the truth. When Drew married a sweet-natured girl from Hot Springs and brought her home to the ranch, Adelaide watched how Marcus welcomed his new daughter-in-law with patience and kindness, never once making her feel like an outsider. She saw the same gentleness in Drew as he interacted with his new wife, and she knew that Marcus had taught their son by example what it meant to be a good man and a good husband. Maggie married a schoolteacher from Rapid City and moved away, but she visited often with her growing family. She had become a teacher herself, carrying on Adelaide's passion for education. Samuel became a veterinarian, using his natural affinity for animals to help ranchers throughout the territory. Stephen stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and eventually taking over the day-to-day operations as Marcus grew older. On their 30th anniversary, Marcus and Adelaide sat on the porch once more, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Marcus's hair had gone gray, and his face showed the lines of age, but to Adelaide, he was still the gentle man who had given her a room of her own and promised never to force her into anything. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, taking Adelaide's hand, "about how different my life could have been. If you hadn't answered my advertisement, if you had believed Sarah's warnings completely and never come, if you had run away after meeting me." "But I didn't," Adelaide said. "I stayed. I took the time to know you, and I fell in love with the most wonderful man I've ever known." "I'm not wonderful," Marcus protested. "I'm just a rancher who got lucky enough to find the right woman." "You're a man who turned tragedy into triumph," Adelaide said firmly. You lost your parents and were scarred trying to save them, but you didn't let that destroy you. You built a life and a legacy. You've been a loving husband and father. You've been a pillar of this community. You are wonderful, Marcus Rutherford, whether you believe it or not. Marcus pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. 3 decades had passed since that frightening day when Adelaide had stepped off the stagecoach expecting to meet a monster. 3 decades of love and laughter, hardship and triumph, raising children and building a life together. The little town of Hot Springs had grown over the years, and the Rutherford name was respected throughout the territory. People no longer looked at Marcus and saw only his scars. They saw a successful rancher, a devoted husband and father, a man of integrity and honor. When Marcus finally passed away at the age of 75, surrounded by his wife and children and grandchildren, the entire town turned out for his funeral. Men who had known him for decades spoke of his fairness and kindness, his willingness to help a neighbor in need, his skill with horses, and his business acumen. Women who had been friends with Adelaide for years spoke of what a devoted husband he had been, how they had never seen a couple more in love even after all their years together. Adelaide stood at his graveside, her children supporting her, and she remembered the scared young woman who had arrived in Hot Springs expecting to marry a monster. She remembered the gentle man who had proven her fears wrong, who had loved her with a depth and constancy that never wavered. Adelaide lived another 10 years after Marcus's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about their grandfather and making sure they understood the lesson of his life. That true character lies beneath the surface, that gentleness is a form of strength, and that love can transform even the most broken and scarred among us into something beautiful. When she finally joined Marcus in the small cemetery outside Hot Springs, her children buried her beside him, just as she had requested. On the shared headstone, they inscribed the words Adelaide had written in her journal years before. She expected a monster and found a man. He proved he was gentle. The Rutherford Ranch continued for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to what Marcus and Adelaide had built together. The story of how they had met, how Adelaide had overcome her fear and Marcus had opened his heart despite past hurt, became a cherished family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Drew, before he died at the age of 80, made sure his own children understood the significance of their grandparents' story. Your grandfather could have let his scars make him bitter and hard, he told them. Your grandmother could have run away in fear, but they chose differently. They chose to see past the surface to what really mattered. They chose love over fear, faith over doubt. That's the legacy they left us, and it's one we need to carry forward. In the family Bible that had belonged to Adelaide, pressed between the pages, were the wildflowers Marcus had picked for her on one of their early rides together. They had faded and dried, but Adelaide had kept them all those years as a reminder of the moment she had realized that the scarred cowboy she had married was the gentlest, most loving man she could have ever hoped to find. The ranch house still stood decades later, expanded and modernized but maintaining its essential character. Rutherford descendants still worked the land, raised cattle and horses, and told the story of Marcus and Adelaide, the mail-order bride who expected a monster, and found instead a love that transcended fear and prejudice and time itself. Their story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that appearances can deceive, that true character reveals itself in actions rather than words, and that the courage to look past our fears and prejudices can lead us to the greatest treasures of all: love, family, and a life built on mutual respect and devotion. In Hot Springs, where it all began, the old-timers still remembered Marcus Rutherford, the scarred cowboy who had been judged harshly by his appearance, and Adelaide Armstrong, the mail-order bride who had the courage to see beyond the scars. Their story was told as a testament to the power of love and the importance of looking beneath the surface to find the truth. The little church where they had married still stood, and couples getting married there often heard the story of Marcus and Adelaide, of how a terrified bride and a lonely cowboy had found each other and built something beautiful together. It gave hope to those starting their own journeys, a reminder that love could overcome fear, that gentleness was a strength, and that the right person could transform a life completely. And somewhere in the vast sky over South Dakota, perhaps Marcus and Adelaide were together still, looking down on the legacy they had created, on the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their story forward, proof that one mail-order bride's courage and one cowboy's gentleness had created something that would endure long after they were gone. The end of their mortal lives was not the end of their story. It lived on in every Rutherford who chose kindness over cruelty, in every person who looked past surface appearances to see the character beneath, in every couple who built their marriage on respect and love rather than fear and obligation. Adelaide had written in her journal in the final entry before she died, "I came to Hot Springs expecting my life to end. Instead, I found where my life truly began. Marcus taught me that monsters exist only in our imagination, that real men are measured by their hearts rather than their faces. He was the gentlest soul I ever knew, and loving him was the greatest privilege of my life. If I could go back to that terrified girl stepping off the stagecoach, I would tell her, 'Don't be afraid. The man waiting for you is not a monster. He is your destiny, your home, your heart. Choose courage. Choose love. You will never regret it.'" Those words, preserved in her careful handwriting, became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations, a reminder of where the Rutherford family had begun and the values upon which it had been built. The ranch continued to thrive. The land Marcus and Adelaide had worked so hard to build up remaining productive and valuable. Their descendants honored their memory by treating their own families with the same love and respect Marcus and Adelaide had shown each other, by giving people chances even when others had written them off, by understanding that true worth came from character rather than appearance or circumstance. In the end, the story of the mail-order bride who expected a monster and found a man, the cowboy who proved he was gentle, became more than just a love story. It became a legacy of hope, a testament to the transformative power of love, and a reminder that the greatest treasures in life often come when we have the courage to look past our fears and see the truth that lies beneath.